Today at about 2 o'clock in front of the Mekong Rainier Supermarket on Rainier Avenue in central Seattle, it couldn't get more central than that, an older Asian guy, probably 60 years old, maybe a little bit older, a little bit heavy set. I'm guessing he might have been Filipino or possibly Indonesian. Flipped me off. He gave me the big middle finger as he walked out of the store. And I just want to talk about that and how the whole group of people in Seattle are taken in by mask wearing, and they believe that masks will end COVID because of what they see on television, but they're not thinking at all. And giving somebody the middle finger, especially under these circumstances, just kind of underscores how stupid people are and how gullible they are, and it's kind of foreshadows our future if we don't realize and start using our heads to think. And I'm going to explain that. We're doomed if this kind of thing is the way people really think. And I believe people are so stupid they can't look beyond Seattle. I mean, I've spent many years of my life traveling. I've been overseas, living overseas in 2 different countries, and I kind of have more of a global perspective on it. But the people in Seattle are very sheltered, and they may think that they're intelligent and smart and they listen to NPR, but this could not be a more prime example of how stupid people are. And I'd like to explain it. So first of all, what happened in Mekong Rainier is I was shopping in the store. I do have a mask on because they require a mask, which is fine. I don't think it really when COVID hit, Mekong Rainier was absolutely packed. When they said that people had to shelter in place, that grocery store was open, and I would go inside of it, and I would feel uncomfortable because it was absolutely packed. Nobody was wearing a mask. You walk up to the cashier. It's the same lady. There's probably about 6 different people working there. They were exposed to hundreds and hundreds of people in Seattle, which is where the outbreak started in the United States. It all started in Seattle. And none of them got sick, but eventually they started this mask rule. I think it was probably several weeks in that they put up these plastic shields and said you got to wear a mask to go in. So we're now in September, of course, so we've had a lot of time to kind of check the evidence and find out what's really going on. But I was in the store. I got a phone call. And I walked outside to answer the call, and I took off my mask after I was outside, and I was standing probably a good 15 or 20 feet away from the door, standing there alone by myself. Nobody else was near me. Older Asian guy, and I kind of sympathize. I sympathize with everybody who's rude. I give them a pass. I don't. It doesn't really bother me. I've encountered ladies in their 40s and 50s that have just lost it, in public, and I forgive them. It's kind of a sign of the times. But so this guy comes out. He's got like this Honda RAV4 something from the 1990s. It looked like about 20 years old. One of the windows was broken out, and he had plastic taped in. Not the most, just to kind of give you a picture of what it was. The guy's kind of grubby looking, walks up to his car, and his car is kind of in front of the door, so I was at least 20 feet away from him, gives me a big middle finger, really stuck it up high. And then he opens up his car door, and I was going to kind of wave at him, He opens up his car door, takes off his mask, and starts eating because he bought something in the store. And he was waiting for his wife, and he sat there with his mask. I guess it's okay if your mask is like under your chin. That shows that you're socially acceptable. But he sat there eating after he flipped me off. And that went on for the whole time that I was on the phone, which was about 10 minutes. And then eventually his wife came out, and she looked pretty old and ragged as well. They got in their car and left. And what happened in Seattle is, I live in Idaho, but in June 3rd, I was in Seattle, and everybody shifted to wearing full masks at all times. It was almost impossible to find anybody county-wide from Covington up to Woodinville over to Fauntleroy. you could not see anyone without a mask because people were so convinced that that was going to end COVID. That's all we had to do. We'd just gone through this shelter-in-place nonsense for part of March, all of April, all of May, and they said what we're going to do is we're all going to wear masks, and that's going to work because the last 2 months hadn't done anything. But I was coming from Idaho, where the mask wearing is pretty haphazard. I mean, not many people. You could go into stores and you do your business and not see a lot of people wearing masks. And in Seattle, what happened after June 3rd is very little. The cases escalated. The curve advanced all the way through the middle of July. So you had at least a solid 6 weeks. And I mean, I'd like to know how, if everybody puts a mask on on June 3rd, which is when I was there. It was probably occurred before that, and it was a pretty radical shift because in April and May there were not that many people wearing masks. There were some, but it wasn't like the 1st of June. I think they put in some kind of a mask mandate. But if they were that effective, why wouldn't you see results before the end of July? Why would it take 60 days to see results? So cases and hospitalizations and everything kind of grew until the middle of July, and then it tapered off. In Idaho, there's a town called Caldwell, Idaho, which had a school that actually opened at the beginning of June. Caldwell is kind of that's where the places where they had rogue bars that remained open. They refused to close, or maybe they were just closed for a few weeks, and they said, "Look, I can't survive if we don't open the bar." And there were threats of taking away their liquor license. But I think for the most part, Caldwell, which is in the Treasure Valley, not too far from Boise, it's fairly populated and it's not rural at all. There's a lot of people per square mile or whatever, just like some places in the Pacific Northwest here in King County. And they had a nightlife scene. Almost nobody wore a mask. So you've got this kind of night and day, comparison where you drive 8 hours and you get to Caldwell, Idaho, and you drive to Seattle, and it's like night and day in terms of the mask usage, and the curves were exactly the same. So in my mind, that's pretty much solid proof, not even looking at other countries, that you're not getting a lot of bang for the buck. Everybody's masking up and being rude to each other. I mean, these people are like bullies, these mask bullies. You've got to wear a mask, and everybody complies in Seattle. Totally different in Idaho, and the curves, hospitalizations, everything is identical. I mean, compare. Look at Sweden. Sweden is kind of a trigger word for some reason. A lot of people say, well, they have so many deaths per million and whatever. But really, I mean, they had no masks, no lockdowns, no school. I think some of the older, the kids in college and high school continued to take exams in their schools, but the younger kids were in schools all the time. And there's reasons people will say, well, the Swedish people followed rules, and there's ways to kind of explain away the fact that they never wore masks, and their curves with the COVID is identical to Seattle, identical to Idaho. They kind of rise, and so the virus is just going to do what it's going to do. Masks don't make a damn bit of difference. You can see that. In comparing the country of Belarus, which I've been to, I drove from with a friend of mine in 1989. We went from Warsaw in Poland across White Russia or Belarus, into Smolensk in Russia. We stopped into Minsk, and I spent the night in a small hotel there. We may have been there for 2 nights. And it's a very industrial town. I mean, there's not a lot of people like engaging in, really healthy activities. A lot of, drinking and eating potatoes and meat and just going to working in factories and things like that. And it's crowded, and there's nothing especially significant about the population there. The president, Lukashenko, called it a corona psychoses, said, we're not going to follow any of these lockdown rules. He encouraged people to go to church. In early April there was Easter. They had big soccer matches, and they have there's 3,200 schools in Belarus, and that's what I've read. And they all remained open. They never had. I mean, for doing everything that is opposite of what we're told causes a crisis. They had no crisis, and they did everything wrong, according to what we're told. Nothing happened. So this is another very big and important and significant example. Also, it was reported, I think in July, I read that they had been making such a mockery of these lockdown cult that the IMF said, we're not going to lend you money unless you do a lockdown. Now, that should be tracked down. I mean, that was in the international press. I read that, and it would speak volumes about how phony it is, and there are global elites that want lockdowns to occur no matter what. So Sweden, Belarus, there's other examples. There's, my example of Caldwell, Idaho, and Caldwell actually had the earliest outbreaks in Idaho. When it first came, it kind of cropped up in Caldwell, and no doubt they've got immunity in my mind, because there's just nothing going on there with the virus, and they had it early and they ignored it, kind of like Belarus. It's like a little microcosm of what happens, when you just let the virus run wild. Sturgis is another example. I mean, 460,000 guys a month ago. It's been 6 weeks. They all met in Sturgis, partied, drank, and these are unhealthy, older guys, not very healthy, I'm sure, across the board, and nothing happened. There's, the international, or especially the domestic press would be all over it if there was even 5 guys that ended up dying from it. There's a story of one guy who already had an illness, who was in his 60s, that went home to Minnesota and died after Sturgis. But if COVID is really that virulent and fatalistic and going to cause a lot of problems, how could 460,000 people, can you imagine the scale of that, party together for 10 days and all ride home, and we don't hear anything about even 0.001% have ended up in the ICU? And you can't keep secrets. There's no way you could have, even 1% ended up in the hospital, that'd be 4,600, secrets out there where sisters or brothers or aunts or friends or relatives or workmates would be reporting on it. And there's just that, it's proof positive to me that people running around insisting on wearing masks in Seattle should just take them off. We should have NFL games and go out, and if you're elderly, stay home by all means. I mean, I personally, I'm in my 50s. I don't like to go to crowded places, but that's my decision, and I don't think masks are going to matter one bit. And I'm not alone in saying this. The other thing is that a lot of doctors are standing up and saying, look, I don't think the masks work, but not a lot are standing up saying, yeah, I agree with all of this. I've just noticed that. I could be wrong on that, but I believe a surgeon, when they're standing over a patient who's cut open, they wear masks so that they can talk and they don't end up having their spittle end up in a wound. But to think that it's going to stop coronavirus, given all that we know, the essence of science is observing evidence, and the evidence does not support one iota that marching around in public at all times, or in a Home Depot or in a small grocery store, wearing a mask is going to make any difference at all. It really is not. And we've got all of these external evidence to prove that, to absolutely prove it. So the other thing that is pretty I don't know how to, it's kind of a cult following almost. This Jay Inslee, who's the present governor of Washington State, he actually bumbled and totally and royally screwed up at the very beginning of the coronavirus. I followed it extremely carefully and closely. My daughter was working in a lab in downtown Seattle at the time, and she's very insightful. And she's in Capitol Hill, where all the hospitals are, and she was doing blood work in a lab for various hospitals. And so I was in close contact with her, and at that time I started watching some epidemiologists as well, and watching interviews with experienced epidemiologists. And by the way, it's kind of a side note. Many years ago, an epidemiologist in King County contacted me because I'd eaten in a restaurant, and they had got my credit card information that I was a patron of the restaurant. I did not get sick, but apparently somebody did, and there was some bad lettuce or some bad food item there, and they were tracking down and contacting anybody who had eaten there. It was actually Armando's in downtown Renton. It's kind of a famous place. I think it's still going. And Armando's is kind of a well-known character in downtown Renton. But there was an outbreak at his restaurant. I was contacted, and I think, epidemiology, there are people that study just that field. And I remember talking to the lady that called me, how'd you become an epidemiologist, and what's involved in that? And I learned a little bit about it at that time. And when a virus comes along like this, the first thing you do is isolate the elderly. That's very well known. You lock down the care homes, and the first death in Washington State occurred in Kirkland, Washington, in a care home. And the employees at that care home were just free to go anywhere. They worked in different care homes. They went from one care home to another care home. And if Inslee had any, sense of knowing what to do and calling on the right advisors, and I mean, if we had decent epidemiologists that we pay here in Washington State, they would have told him, immediately lock down those care homes. That's what should have happened. The care homes in Kirkland, Washington should have been locked down carefully. And even if he can be forgiven, I guess. But I've mentioned that to people, and they say, oh, no, you can't criticize Jay Inslee. He's the Democrat governor. He's doing a great job. He also constructed a great big military hospital on the Quest Field Stadium grounds that never saw one patient. Granted, we really didn't know what was going to happen, but to me, he's done a terrible job. He did a terrible job from the get-go, and they're pushing a type of a climate agenda. You can see that in Canada with Justin Trudeau. I believe this whole coronavirus has kind of suddenly made all of the climate lobby dreams come true. There's nobody flying. The entire airline and travel industry is completely done. My passport's worth nothing. You can't fly anywhere, massive industries are totally stifled, including the aircraft industry, and so many industries and small businesses are just getting totally wiped out, so that businesses can be concentrated in the hands of these large, massive conglomerates, and they just don't want to let people go and say, you don't have to wear a mask. You can continue to be totally in fear of this, and we need to keep businesses closed, and you can't get your hair cut, and the gyms need to be closed, which is just ludicrous. The governors are acting toward a different means. Public health is not the concern. What the concern is the environmental, the lobby that wants to keep all the peasants locked up and shut down because they're worried about the climate. And that is probably the main reason why we're seeing this action. They also want the economy to crash. It has become political. And am I deeply political? No, absolutely not. I actually liked 3 of the candidates that were going up against Trump. I loved Howard Schultz. I know it's kind of controversial, but I'm not afraid to say I kind of like the guy. He was a very decent, he's a good businessman. He takes good care of his employees. I I've followed Starbucks. He kind of sold the Sonics out from under us, but he's kind of he's a very good speaker. He's a very intelligent guy. He's a marketing guy. And he's socially responsible. Name one thing that Starbucks hasn't done, that meets the liberal social agenda. He would have been a great challenger, and he'd be debating Donald Trump and bringing in very important, very great issues to the fore. And the Democrats totally ignored him. I like two of the other ones. I don't want to get into that, but no, I'm not some crazed partisan. I think more widely, energetic candidates should be up there. But my hometown of Seattle has just greatly disappointed me. People have collectively, even these intelligent people, they just will not look at evidence. They think that here we are now since June. So it's June, July, August. I mean, we're 3.5 months. June, July, August. 3.5 months. I can't even believe it. Into total mask compliance, and they still wear the mask. It's symbolic. It's symbolic of a lot of things. We need to move on and understand who's at risk, how to protect them, and get on with our lives. I mean, we've totally overreacted, and the fact that the guy flipped me off today, it just symbolizes a lot, and it kind of strikes hard at my disgust with people here in my hometown and how stupid they are, and also the media, why they can't spread the news about what's going on outside of Seattle, where the curves are identical and nobody's wearing these masks. Why aren't they talking about Sturgis? What's going on with Belarus, Sweden, the Netherlands as well? The Netherlands is totally. I know somebody who's there, not wearing masks at all, and people are not worried about it. And they stood up and said, "We're not going to wear these things," and they're not wearing them, and nothing is happening. Nothing. Look at the Netherlands chart, and so you can't really explain it away for any other reason than just basic, pure epidemiology in its truest form, and that is what happens with a virus, a respiratory virus. They work their way through. You can't hide from it. Masks don't do anything. You can protect your elderly, and you can do other things, but being mad at each other and trying to pursue a climate agenda when you know it's not about public health, that's just wrong. And that's all I want to say right now. It's kind of a long rant. I hope people listen to it because I think a lot of important things were said. All right. Thanks for listening. Share this, share it wide and far, and take care, everybody.
This is the end of my call that song, honey, honey. This is the end of my